I am going to try and cram in to one video a bunch of stories that relate to this course, covered in about 3 or 4 chapters. Um, Hopefully, these stories that I'm going to tell you will help you be prepared to recognize things that might come at you when you're at work that relate to some of these topics. Now, let me point out that I've got a list of stories I'm going to tell from my experiences, but one thing I want you to notice that none of these have to do with the quality of a person's work. What they have to do with are other issues that are ethical in nature or cover some of the other topics like loyalty, conflict of interest, and trust. So these are the kinds of things that get people in more trouble than the quality of work they do. And my worst experiences at working have had nothing to do with the quality of my work. It was to do with some of these other things. So with that, let me jump in. If I was telling these during a face-to-face class spread out over, you know, 3 or 4 classes, they would be longer stories. So these are the condensed versions, but I think you'll get the point. Now the ones with red stars are ones that seem to have had major consequences. Either somebody lost their job or it damaged their career significantly. So I just put those there to make sure I didn't miss out on anything. So I've categorized them under conflict of interest, loyalty, burning bridges, and confidentiality. Those are loose definitions, but I think you'll get the point. So with conflict of interest, what we're talking about here is when you're working for a company, but you have some kind of an additional relationship, either, typically outside the company with a competitor or with a supplier that puts you at odds with your own company. And if you aren't careful, you can get in trouble. And your book discusses this significantly. But this first story I'm going to tell, it's about carpeting. And what was going on there was at General Motors, we put carpets in cars. Well, the same companies that make carpets for cars make carpets for home. And one superintendent allowed the carpet company to carpet a condo that he owned. And he was told by his fellow managers who knew about this, he was told, don't do that. That's a conflict of interest. The company's made it real clear that you'll get in trouble. Well, he did it anyway. Lo and behold, the company found out about it, and this superintendent lost his job. Didn't have anything to do with his quality of his work, but he violated that conflict of interest policy. The other one I want to talk about, it says samples. Now, you have to be a little bit wary and make sure when you're working that you don't set yourself up for a situation where you could get in trouble or get fired even though you didn't do something wrong technically. So this is a story of a person who was a salesperson, and they would take samples from the company out to the client and then demonstrate for the client. And so they had an agreement, this person had an agreement with the owner of the company and with the people in accounting that she would check this stuff out, take it out, and periodically come back and reconcile with accounting that, okay, I used so many cases of this, now, adjust the inventory. And that's what she did for a couple of years. Here's what happened. new owner of the company. It happened to be a relative of the first owner. He took it over. He didn't particularly like this person because he didn't hire her, but they also got a new accountant. So this person walked in one day, sat down with the accountant and said, okay, here's a list of all the stuff we need to reconcile. And the accountant said, what's that? And he said, well, this is the stuff I took to show. Well, the accountant went to the owner and said, she's been stealing from the company. She was taking the stuff and not checking an account. That afternoon, she was fired. Now, did she do anything wrong? Not with the first company, and not with the first manager or owner, but this was an excuse to get rid of her. And I could tell you another story just like that, but I don't have time, and one story suffices. So, my advice is, whenever you take anything from a company to use as a sample or to use as a demonstration, to give away, or whatever, just to check it out, get your paperwork to cover you so that you don't leave this out in case somebody wants to get you in trouble, because that happens. Next is loyalty. This Christmas party one, what happened there was we would have an annual Christmas party in the industrial engineering department, and we would go to a restaurant. Everybody would pay for their meal, and we would have a Christmas party. One year, it didn't get planned ahead of time, and when we went to make reservations at a restaurant, we couldn't do it. The superintendent of industrial engineering said, tell you what, we'll have at my house, and I will order, a ham or something, and we'll have a potluck in that. And so he put out a flyer, and it had all the information, and everybody was going to chip in $5 toward the ham or whatever it was, and then bring stuff. I was out in working with the superintendent of the department I was taking care of. He also happened to be a personal friend. And we were talking about Christmas parties, and he told us about his Christmas party. And I said, well, here, we're having a Christmas party, and here's the flyer. And so he read the flyer. And he said, so the superintendent isn't paying for the ham? And I said, no, we're all chipping in. Well, here's what happened, and I didn't know about this for 2 years. My friend, who was a superintendent, at lunch with all the other superintendents, they would have lunch together. He says to my superintendent, he says, hey, I hear you're having a Christmas party. And he said, yeah. And he said, and you're charging the guys, for the party? And he said, well, yeah, normally we do it somewhere else. Everybody would pay anyway, but, we're coming. And then he said, well, I think that's pretty cheap. He says, when I have a party at my house, I pay for all the food, we have all the booze. And he mocked and ridiculed my superintendent and embarrassed him in front of the other ones. Then he said to my friend, he said, well, how did you hear about this? And he said, well, Phil showed me the flyer. Well, my superintendent got so mad at me that he told my boss, the supervisor, he said, because he felt I was disloyal, he said, as long as I'm alive, Phil will never get another raise or promotion. And guess what? Until he died 2 years later of cancer, I didn't get even a single raise or promotion. I didn't know why. I was doing a good job, and I was even starting to think about leaving because I didn't see there was any potential there. Well, he died of cancer. We got a new superintendent. Um, I got in the first year, I got one raise and well, three raises and two promotions. Some of them went together. And then not too long after that, I was a supervisor, and I was sitting there with the new superintendent who was a supervisor before, and he was going through the desk and he found a piece of paper. He said, "Oh, Phil," he says, "boy, you really made the previous superintendent really mad one time." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "It was about a Christmas party." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, apparently, this other superintendent was giving him a rough time and you got blamed for it. And he said you would never get a raise or a promotion as long as he was alive." And it struck me, then I knew what happened. Now, why am I telling this long drawn out story? Well, that didn't have anything to do with the quality of my work, but it was my superintendent's feeling of loyalty. And that brings me to the next loyalty story that also involved him. And that's what's called pocket people. In industrial engineering, we would set up our assembly line and have operators along the assembly line. And during our planning, we would do what we called line balancing. We would try to make sure that people had equitable workloads so the people working together all felt like they had the same workloads. But what a supervisor would do during line balancing, they might have 20 operators, and what they would do is they would create a couple of light, say 3 light jobs. And then after the line started up and we got running, they would take and they would combine 2 of these, they would combine these 3 into 2, and then that gave them a third person that was free, and we called that a pocket person. And this was a person that the supervisor could use for anything that he or she needed. And it could be to replace somebody else, there's all kinds of reasons, but this made their life easier. Well, our superintendent came in and said, "Okay, what I want you industrial engineers to do is to go out and find all the pocket people and turn them in so that we can eliminate these people and save money." And we said, "Well, what about our superintendents, the ones that are behind all this and working with the foreman and creating this? This is what they do so that they can survive." And he said, "Yeah, but our job is to find these pocket people and get rid of them." And he says, "I don't care if you have to hide behind columns and watch in secret." He literally said that. "I want you to find these people and turn them in." So we had a meeting, all of the industrial engineers, and we said, we have a loyalty issue, a loyalty problem here. How can we have a working relationship with our superintendents if we go through, find all these pocket people, turn them in, and then they're now stuck with a lack of flexibility? And then they wouldn't trust us anymore. We can't work with them because they wouldn't believe anything we could say. So what we agreed to do was, and this wasn't an attempt to be disloyal to our superintendent, but it was an attempt to survive. We each went to our superintendent and we said, "Look, need your help. We've been assigned to find your pocket people, identify them, and then they would be eliminated. And we know that that would be a hardship. And we feel caught in the middle. So what we would like to do is, if you could give up a couple of pocket people so that we look like we're doing our job, and you can still remain flexible with the other pocket people. Then our superintendent would be happy because he would have gotten, saved a lot of money. So the superintendents realized that that was a fair thing to do. And so each superintendent gave up about 3 or 4 pocket people out of maybe 10 or 12. So they gave up some. And so we gave those up. The superintendent was happy. The production superintendents were satisfied, and we didn't get in trouble. But we had a dilemma there. What are we going to do? All right. And I have a worse story than that coming up. Burning bridges. Now, if you don't know what burning bridges refers to, what that has to do with when you work somewhere and you have some kind of a complaint, or you have an enemy, or you're at odds, you have a supervisor you don't like the company, whatever it is. Sometimes there's a tendency when you leave to just tell everybody off, maybe write a nasty letter, leave some kind of bad evidence against somebody, and then you leave. And, you say, I'm never going back there, I don't care, I hate these people, and I'm mad at what they did to me, and you leave with, shaking the dust off your feet as you go. The other thing that you can do that is similar to that is if you have a tendency to get into a really bad fight, disagreement with other people in other departments over things. Molehills turn into mountains. Big things become big issues. Sometimes you have to kind of back off, take things a little easy, compromise to avoid those kinds of fights. Well, the reason you don't want to do that, when you leave a company, you thank them for the opportunity, tell them you think they're going to be successful, appreciate the opportunity, you learned a lot, you grew a lot, and you wish them well, and you go. If they've got problems that you're leaving behind, let them deal with them. So here's what happened. I was working one summer after I went to Cal Poly Pomona. I worked this summer for General Motors in Van Nuys doing a solid waste management project. And early in the summer, this guy moved into the empty desk behind me. And I didn't know he was coming or anything. It was no big deal. And so I turned around and introduced myself. And he mentioned his name to me. And I said, oh. And I knew who he was. I didn't know him. But he was the superintendent of industrial engineering for General Motors overseas operations in Mexico. And I said, oh. I said, I thought you were in Mexico. And he said, I was. And I said, what happened? Or why are you here in Los Angeles at this Van Nuys plant? And he said, well, he said, you got to be careful who you have battles with or who you burn your bridges with. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, many years ago when I was a young engineer working in Detroit, I had a really knockdown, drag out argument battle with this other engineer from another place in the company. And he said it got really nasty, really, really nasty. Then time passed. He said I ended up going to Mexico City, superintendent of industrial engineering. He said I loved it. He said I learned to speak the language. I got married, had a family. I had a really nice villa outside of the city that I could go to on the weekends. I was just living the wonderful life. And he said, then all of a sudden, we got a new vice president of General Motors overseas operations. And guess who it was? It was the guy that he had that battle with like 18 or 20 years before. It only took a matter of minutes before the new vice president saw who he was in that position and demoted him and sent him back to Detroit. So he went back to Detroit. Well, his family didn't like Michigan. He didn't like Michigan. So he thought it would be nice maybe to transfer to Los Angeles, which was a little more of a Hispanic culture for his family's sake. And so that's why he was at Van Nuys. Well, the good news is that he got recruited to go back to Mexico City to be superintendent of industrial engineering for Toyota. But that little fight he had with that one guy 20 years before, 18, 20 years before, cost him the job he liked later on. So you have to be real careful. Be real careful about spreading rumors and gossip. It's kind of fun to do sometimes. You hear some cool tidbit of gossip and you spread it. But let me tell you that it's only a matter of time before you could get in some really deep trouble over that. This one story I want to tell you is we had an industrial engineering department. We had a guy who had a desk job. He never had to leave his desk. And he had kind of a boring job. So the fun he had in life, the way he got his jollies, was by collecting rumors and spreading rumors. And he was right by the door, and you'd walk in, and he would say, "Hey, what do you hear?" And I said, "What? Yeah, what's going on? You hear anything?" And he was asking about, "Hey, what's the rumors? What's going on?" And he would collect rumors, and then people would walk in, and if he had a new rumor or gossip, he'd say, "Hey, did you hear about this?" And then he would spread the rumor. Well, people decided to play a joke on him. Plus, we were getting tired of being asked about rumors. And so people started feeding him false rumors. And then he started spreading those false rumors. Well, sometimes false rumors that are meant to be innocent can turn out to be harmful. And that's what happened. And so you have to be real careful. And in office buildings, they are rumor mills. And things spread so fast. At Cal Poly Pomona, if you want to spread some news, you don't send an email. You just tell somebody in the staff, and it'll be across the college and then to the other colleges within a few hours. And that's how you spread information. I got really upset when I was department chair that if I had something confidential going on, the other staff in the College of Engineering knew about it before I did. And I kind of resented that. So please don't spread rumors. Here's another one I want to talk about. This one, if it was regards my dad. My parents owned a Dairy Queen in Highland, California for 11 years. And down the street was a McDonald's. Well, there was this young girl. He hired mostly high school girls to work at the Dairy Queen. And there was this one high school girl who wasn't a good worker. And whenever she got in trouble or got complained, her mother would show up and jump to her defense and stuff. It wasn't a healthy thing. Well, eventually my dad had to let this young woman go. Well, whatever, she ends up applying for a job down the street at the McDonald's. And the owner of the McDonald's called my dad and said, "Hey, this girl has applied for a job. Um, she used to work for you. I saw in the application. Can you tell me about her?" And he said, "No." He says, "I really don't want to comment on a previous employee," because he knew it wasn't good, so he didn't want to say anything. Well, this guy at McDonald's, the owner, finally said, "Well, why did you let her go? What happened?" So finally, my dad told this guy what happened or why he let her go. Well, a day or two later, this girl's mother is at my dad's Dairy Queen. She's in his face, giving him a bunch of grief for telling this guy at McDonald's a bunch of stuff about his daughter, and she just really let my dad have it. Well, okay. Time passes. Another bad employee leaves my dad's Dairy Queen, ends up applying at the McDonald's. The guy from McDonald's, who promised he would never say where he got that previous information, because he's the one that told the mother why. He asks my dad about this one employee who had been a bad employee. So what do you think my dad said this time? This time he said, "Oh, she was wonderful. I hated to see her go. She was a really good employee." Guess what? The guy from McDonald's never ever called my dad again for a referral. Okay, my last story, and this is the big one. Call it the story of the big tiger. So the big tiger was a general superintendent of production. And he had the name Big Tiger because he walked around like the big tiger. I mean, he was in charge. And he called me in and he said, "Phil," he said, "you're," and so here's the org chart. So here's the plant manager. He runs the whole plant. And here is the production manager. And then here's the general superintendent. And this is the big tiger. Then over here we have the industrial engineering department. So here's the superintendent, supervisor, and this is me. Then over here we have the quality department, and they have the director of quality, the superintendent of quality, the general supervisor, they have the planning coordinator, okay, and I was the industrial engineer that served or serviced the quality department. That's the inspection department, salvage, reliability engineering, inspection, all that. Okay. So the big tiger calls me up and says, "Phil," he says, "I want you to do an audit of all the inspection stations and compare what they're actually inspecting to what the process sheets say." Well, he's asking me to audit these people. So, well, okay, I said, and he said, "But don't tell him what you're doing." I said, "I can't tell him what I'm doing?" He says, "No, I want you to do it confidentially." So I felt like I had a problem because, I work with these people all the time. The big tiger's asking me to spy on them and write this report. So I went to my superintendent, the same one I talked about earlier, and I said, "Here's what I've been asked to do." And he told me not to tell them what I'm doing. I said, "What do you think? You're really my boss." And he said, well, if the big tiger said don't tell him, then don't tell him. All right. So I went out, I audited them, and everything I found showed that they were doing a good job. But what I also found was there were discrepancies in the inspection documentation, um, the process sheets. And because there were discrepancies in the process sheets, the quality department had to make changes. So, for example, let's say you're supposed to check to see if a light switch worked, but there's no battery in it yet. Well, you could see if it worked as far as going in and out or turning left and right, but you couldn't see if it turned on the lights or did anything until the battery was in it. So they would inspect it once to see if it functioned, but then they had to create a whole new instruction downstream to inspect it again to see if it really worked. So the inspection department had done a yeoman's job of making sure that everything was covered, even if the inspection sheets or the process sheets were in error. So I get paged to go into the general superintendent's office. He's sitting here behind his desk. I walk into this door. Here are sitting the director of quality, the superintendent, general superintendent, and production planner. And here's a chair he told me to sit in. And what had happened was I'd finished my report, and I knew that I got to distribute it to everybody. So I had distributed it to all these people in their mailboxes, in their offices. And I had given a copy to him. So I walk in, I sit down, the big tiger picks up my report, and he starts going through it and twisting everything, making everything sound bad, ripping these guys apart. And they're stunned because they don't know what he's reading, what he's looking at. And finally the director says, well, where did you get that information? What are you talking about? And this is literally what happened. He stood up, he's laughing, and he throws the report to the director. And he says, Phil gave it to me. And he laughs as he walks out of the department. And there I am with these 4 people looking at me, and if looks could kill, I would have been dead. And then we had to walk together all the way from this office all the way up to the main building. And these guys were livid, except the superintendent, thank God, who had the report. He flipped through it for a few minutes. And as we were walking back, he said, Phil, he said, I think your report showed us as actually being good. But he said, where you screwed up was you didn't let us see it first. See, I really messed up. I had the right to let them see their copies before I gave it to him so that they could see the favorability of the report. Then when they got called into him, he wouldn't have the ability to embarrass them and ridicule them and kill me. He threw me under the bus, didn't he? Now, how do you think I felt about the big tiger after that? I mean, I had to work with him for a few more years in his position, but do you think I went out of my way to make him look good? Or, I did my job. I always did my job. But do you think that he got 100% out of me? Because I could give him enough percent, and then I could give my 100% to somebody else. All right. Now, let me finish the story. So this happened back in the 70s. About 7 years ago, I was at a fraternity reunion in Michigan, and we had all worked at General Motors, all of us, uh, way back when I was in the fraternity, active in the fraternity. And I was talking to one of my fraternity brothers. I didn't know him. He was from a different era. And I said, "Oh, where'd you work?" And he said he worked at a particular General Motors plant. And General Motors had lots of plants. And I said, "Oh," um, I said, "did you know the Big Tiger?" Because I knew that the Big Tiger had been a production manager, and then he became a plant manager at this plant that this guy had worked at. And I said, "Oh, did you know the Big Tiger?" Mentioned his name. And he said, "Oh yeah." He said, "I worked with him for a long time." And I said, he was a plant manager there for many years, wasn't he?" He said, "Yeah, he finished out his career there." And I said, he always wanted to become a regional plant manager. He really wanted this big job. And so he never made it, did he? And he said, "No, no, he never made it." And 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 he said, and I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Oh, you don't know why not, huh?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, he never got regional plant manager because of the way he treated people." So he didn't just treat me like this, he treated a lot of people like that. And what he did was he created a really bad reputation. And yeah, he got this plant manager's job, but they would never consider him for higher than that because of the way he threw other people under the bus. And that's why he had the nickname Big Tiger. So anyway, um, I guess if there's one thing I want to mention is if you're asked to keep information confidential and it affects other people, you need to make sure that you don't get thrown under the bus or uh, act disloyal to other people. You need to figure out how to keep yourself uh, in a good situation so that information is properly shared. Now, in the Challenger case, Beaujolais, he tried to keep information flowing, but there were some other issues. But you see, I had some issues here. So with that, um, I'm going to stop. And like I said, I crammed a whole lot of stuff in, but it's a good idea to try and make sure that you're loyal to people. Let me make one more comment about loyalty. There are managers, executives, people that you're going to work with in your career where the number one most important thing to them is not profit, it's not uh, quality. The number one thing to them is that you are loyal to them and you are always uh, keeping them out of trouble, and then there is also the feeling that they will do whatever it takes to let people know they are in charge. Now, the loyalty thing and the be in charge thing could be independent, but the kind of person that is, they'll come into a position and to let everybody know that they're in charge, they will require every department to lay one person off. And it doesn't matter how good of an employee it is. They just want you to know they're in charge, and they will require every department, or they'll pick some unit and they'll say, okay, we're having a cost savings. Everybody cough somebody up. And if you can't figure out who it is, I'll figure it out for you. And I've seen situations where they just go through files in human resources and they pick who the people are, and the department head had no choice over who they lost. And it was that person making a point that they're in charge. So I know that sounds kind of brutal, but just be aware of that, because you can work for people like that. You just need to be aware of it. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I hope you found this useful sometime in the future maybe. So anyway, thanks.